Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and as Trump continues to stoke violent division within America, sending the National Guard now into Memphis, with threats thrown in the direction of Chicago, one crucial pillar of Republican support could crumble. What would happen to the MAGA project if farmers abandoned Trump? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So it seems to be one of those things. Farmers, rural voters in general, tend to support right-wing governments. So with countries where the right-wing hold power for significant periods of time, you tend to end up with an electoral system sculpted to give rural voters inflated power in elections. And this is certainly true of America. But what would happen if that support melted away? Now, it's not so ridiculous if you look at the example of the UK. In Britain, in election after election, if you drive through rural areas, you will see huge banners in the fields urging people to vote Conservative at election time. I even saw them in 2019 when the Conservative government under Boris Johnson was on the cusp of inflicting a hard Brexit on them. This was always going to be ruinous for farmers, and so it turned out. Was there nothing the Tories could do to stop farmers supporting them, I thought? Well, it turns out there was. Brexit was so damaging that at the last election, those vote Conservative banners in the fields were conspicuous by their absence. The collapse in support was very noticeable. And in terms of voting, Labour went from third place in rural England to first. The Conservatives lost the rural vote. Now, it may only be fleeting, but it happened. What if the same thing happened in America? The Republicans have been rigging elections with redistricting for years. There was a good article in The Guardian this week about how they spent years laying the groundwork whilst the Democrats were napping. Another depressing example of how the world is going to hell, not just because evil people have been getting organised, but because those who generally mean well are so spectacularly stupid. I have ever been on the side of the self-defeating idiots in my political journey. But the point is that the Republicans, even before Trump, had been making moves to further boost the voting power of the sort of voters who support them. Trump is trying to accelerate this process for the midterms next year. But what if some of these types of voters abandoned the Republicans? It happened in the UK. It could happen in the USA as well, for largely the same reason. America's heartland is breaking. It's not a dramatic collapse that you would see on the evening news one day, but it's a slow unravelling. A crisis is quietly pushing thousands of farmers, the backbone of Republican support, to the absolute edge. There was a survey suggesting over 50% of farmers are feeling the intense economic strain directly from policies stemming from the Trump administration. The big culprit, of course, tariffs. These were policies meant to act as a shield to protect American industries. But for farmers, they've become a sword cutting into their profits, leaving their futures hanging precariously in the balance. And this isn't just about abstract numbers. So these are real families, real livelihoods, generations of hard work disappearing. And for every farm which collapses, there are jobs in the wider supply chain affected. According to a piece in the BBC this week, the number of small business bankruptcies filed by farmers in America is at a 5-year high. That's not just to counter businesses. That represents communities losing their anchors, local economies drying up, and a way of life fading away. As prices for crops tumble and debts continue to rise, many farmers are forced to make very difficult decisions that could lead them to sell off their land or abandon farming altogether, severing ties that have been held sometimes for generations. And what makes the situation even more alarming and, a potential political earthquake, many of these farmers were some of Donald Trump's staunchest supporters. They rallied behind him, believe in his promise that his policies would lead to a brighter, more prosperous future for American agriculture. In fact, farmers supported Trump last year by a greater margin than during the previous 2 elections. They really got behind him. They believed in the idea that tariffs would force other nations to play fair, ultimately benefiting them. But when the dust settled and the economic fallout became undeniable, many of these farmers are now reconsidering. Just like in Britain, they were none too good at understanding their own business and its place in the world market. There was a poll conducted. It found that about 54% of these farmers no longer supported Trump's use of tariffs as a negotiation tool. Why the change of tune? Because the economic fallout from these policies would be devastating. Farmers have experienced immediate and drastic price drops. We're talking about, there was an Iowa farmer who reported a 5% drop in crop prices over a 24-hour period of the tariffs being announced the month after. This is a reality that forces farmers to cut back on essential maintenance, delay investments in their equipment, tighten the credit lines to a breaking point, threatens the very viability of their farms. Farmers aren't just feeling the pinch, they're facing a crisis that threatens their generational land and their way of life. They're struggling with higher input costs, fertilizer prices jumped by like $100 a tonne, machinery costs climbing due to duties on steels and parts. These rising expenses are directly eroding their profit margins. And some of those profit margins are very thin already. And this is why so many have already lost their businesses. However, this does not mean that they are right now abandoning the Republicans in droves. There was another survey earlier this year of US producers revealing that a substantial 70% still believe that the tariffs will ultimately strengthen the industry in the long term. And this was after the damage was done. Trump is still being reported to be broadly popular in rural areas. This mixed sentiment highlights the deep divisions and complex calculations farmers are making. They're weighing short-term financial hardship, can they get through it, against this belief they have that future market gains and better trade deals, with partners like China, will ultimately benefit them. They're hoping the short-term pain will lead to long-term gain. But despite deeply ingrained tribal political loyalty, farmers know that their businesses are suffering. Over 80% of surveyed farmers want the trade disruptions to end. They recognise that the agricultural sector is bearing the brunt of these tariff consequences and that the US is losing crucial customers to competitors. I mean, you just give one example so when Trump started his trade war with China, one of the first things China did was they blocked imports of quite a lot of American produce, including beef. Did that mean that China suddenly went on a beef diet? No, they just bought it from Brazil instead. Then, of course, Trump picks a fight with Brazil. Well, you just strengthen those trade ties between Brazil and China, right? To the detriment of US farmers. These farmers, they basically want stability and normal trade relations back, just like the farmers in Britain want now. The survey reveals that farmers aren't just struggling with immediate financial losses. They're witnessing a fundamental and alarming shift in global market dynamics. The US agriculture trade deficit has widened, with exports lagging imports by nearly $5 billion in July of this year. That's a 9% increase from the previous year. Trump went in with this tariff, think we're going to address the deficit. He's widened the deficit, mate. The first 7 months of 2025, the deficit reached an unprecedented $33.6 billion. That's not a blip on a spreadsheet. That is a profound change in how global markets perceive and interact with US agricultural products. Farmers report that international buyers now view US producers as unreliable due to the unpredictable nature of tariffs and trade policies. And this is a perception that won't be easily undone. It's leading to the permanent loss of established markets to competitors abroad, particularly as countries like China pivot to South American suppliers, like I say, for commodities like soybeans. For instance, there was a in Michigan, they were seeing its soybean meal exports fall by 46%. Wheat exports declined by 89% in the first half of 2025. That's not just lost sales, that's lost relationships built over years, now severed because they've found alternative supply chains. So is Trump losing support? Not significantly right now. According to reports, farmers know that their business is suffering. They know it's because of Trump's tariffs, but they believe the president when he tells them that the world market is just going through an adjustment and they will win big in the long run. Remember, these farmers don't understand business, right? They're like the Simpsons' Nelson, believing that his father's really just going out for groceries despite not having come home for years. If they wake up to reality in time, their loss of support could be devastating for the Republicans. Of course, if they remain blinkered to economic reality, by the time they do see that the good times are not actually coming, because I'll tell you what, they ain't, maybe too late. The aim of the game for Trump is to keep stringing them along, keep promising that golden age just round the corner. The good times, keep them hoping and believing that if they just wait a little bit more, it'll be there. And in that time, he's rewiring the electoral system so that their votes won't matter at some point. But how long can struggling rural areas hold out? How strong is their loyalty to a man and a party who are provably destroying their incomes, and they know it. Resisting Trump in democratic cities under assault from their own government, that is one thing. But what may ultimately be the difference between America standing and falling could be traditional Republican voters waking up to reality and realising what's going on before it's too late. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.